And may I say good morning to everyone who is participating. I was asked to speak for 25 minutes. Is that correct?
It, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Right. So let me say,
You
first of
ready?
all, that I love the theme of this conference, Restart the Future. And it provides the right context for my talk, which is titled, How Can Broadcasting Commissions Use Artificial Intelligence to Enable an Environment for Human Progress for Sustainable Development? The, am I fine to go ahead? You, hello?
Hi? You,
Would you like me to go ahead?
yeah, go ahead.
Ah,
Are
good,
you
right.
ready?
Yes, I am. I'm just not sure whether the conference has started.
Yes, the conference, you can go.
Okay, excellent. Okay, all right. And my friends, apologies for that. There's just a slight language barrier. It's not a problem. And I apologize for not being able to speak to you in French. So I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, which is an electronic media regulator, radio, television, and cable. And our engagement with artificial intelligence is based on three considerations. First of all, we are interested in the intersection of AI and the creation, dissemination, and consumption of content. As the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology tells us, artificial intelligence development is likely to have substantial societal and cultural implications connected to communication, particularly selection of information and news that people read, the music that people listen to, the decisions people make, as well as their political interaction and engagement. Some AI systems are even more efficient than humans in mimicking voices and creating videos such as fake news. The problem is that as our populations shift to relying on online sources, they become more susceptible to harmful content. Part of this is obvious: racism, conspiracy theories, incitements of violence, and radicalization propaganda. The more insidious problem is the capacity of AI systems to segregate humanity into bubbles where dissenting views are no longer heard. And over time, this can undermine the basis for shared values and tolerance in society and threaten democracy itself. It is good for technology people to hear about this, and it is good for technology people to be interested in this. The very concept of digital literacy becomes particularly challenging because the AI operating system is a black box, opaque, evolving, untraceable, and understood by very few people, such as some of you who are on this call this morning. But sometimes not even the authors of the initial AI system fully understand the process which results in a particular decision. And this opens an information chasm between the companies and everybody else, including policymakers and regulators. And I say to you, this gap, this information asymmetry, is one of the most pressing concerns in our transition to a world where people develop closer acquaintances and trust with smart devices that are controlled by artificial intelligence. So it begs a question. How do we build media and information literacy if there is little understanding of who created content or how, why, when, and where? And all of this is suggesting a need for a new digital media and information literacy designed to include updated competencies in AI, the management and use of big data, the Internet of Things, AI ethics, AI governance, machine rights, and other fourth industrial revolution technologies such as 3D, augmented reality, virtual reality, and the cloud. Now, with this in mind, the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica launched a project in November of 2020, supported by UNESCO, to establish a digital media and information literacy skills framework for Jamaica. The outputs will include tools to assess digital literacy and recommendations for the creation of a national digital literacy policy, which will include setting and monitoring targets in relation to education, training, employment, digital safety, and media literacy. The second basis for our interest in artificial intelligence is that regulators and policymakers need to have an understanding of AI development, deployment, use, and impacts. Because in the future, regulators such as the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica will themselves be using artificial intelligence for automated content monitoring. And the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica is at the conceptual stage of developing an automated content monitoring system. Let me be very clear. We understand Chinese surveillance mechanisms. The AI-based system that we are developing is to be ethically designed to ensure that the public interest is served and that there is no regulatory overreach. What I will say here is that as potential developers and users of artificial intelligence systems, all of us, including the digital and technical experts on this call, we should all be familiar with the principles that are being developed for AI governance. And some common principles are that AI should be explainable. The system should be able to provide insight into its functioning. The data used to train AI systems should be transparent. It should be possible to attribute accountability for AI-driven decisions and the behaviors of AI systems. Algorithmic awareness and the basic understanding of the working of AI are needed to empower our citizens. And AI should be developed and implemented in accordance with international human rights standards, emphasizing freedom of expression, universal access to information, quality of journalism, media pluralism, and mitigating against the spreading of disinformation. And AI should be inclusive, aiming to avoid bias and allowing for cultural diversity. Now, I should say to you, notwithstanding these noble ideals, the stark reality is that powerful players are invested in an AI arms race driven by profits and national concerns and not necessarily harnessed in human-centric values and ethics. And the point I am making is that we're having emerging a new set of rule makers and a new set of rule takers. But it's clear that the existing multilateral system is not sufficient for meaningful, inclusive AI governance. And we see that deficiency playing out right now in the inequitable access to and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. What does this import? Small island developing states will have to look to their own interests. And this is partly why the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica took on the role of spearheading the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Initiative. Under this initiative, supported by our partners, we have created and engaged in a series of Caribbean forums, the last of which was a Caribbean Youth Forum on April 28th, bringing together players from various specialized stakeholder groups to refine a Caribbean AI roadmap based on 6 principles: resiliency, governance, transformation, upskilling, preservation, and sustainability. And it is going to be offered as a guide for the small island developing states of the Caribbean in using AI to support their transition to digital economies and societies. And I'm going to post a link in the chat to the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Initiative, but for the moment, the website is AI4Caribbean.com. So it is 4, but we're using the number 4. AI4Caribbean.com. The third and final basis for the Broadcasting Commission's interest is that even if regulators do not themselves have the capacity to regulate the torrent of content which is flowing over the air and across the internet, they have to build regulatory capacity for supervising the efficacy of AI tools that are being used by platforms to protect against disinformation and other harms. This should include institutional frameworks that can reconcile cross-channel technology agnostic regulation with deep specialist expertise and the development of new legal concepts of responsibility in the information age. But it is not lost on us that we will face 3 formidable challenges. The first challenge was addressed by John Hopcroft, Turing Award winner, speaking at the 2020 World AI Conference in Shanghai. He said, "We have been accustomed to decision-making by humans or computers following defined rules, but computers in the future will make decisions based on their own learned experience, originating in, but not bound by the defined rules in the starting condition." The second challenge is the pacing problem. the pace of technological development now far exceeds the ability of most countries to develop the necessary legislative and regulatory frameworks. And this is made worse by the black box nature of AI systems, which makes it harder to devise consistent rules. The third challenge is that it is hard to determine the optimal combination of ways to limit harm while also protecting the consumer's freedom of choice, freedom of expression, and personal privacy. And we see that challenge playing out in the United States of America with Section 230 of the US Communications Decency Act, which protects social media, big tech companies from civil liability. And what is the outcome? Extensive abuses have now made this approach increasingly untenable, and reform now appears inevitable. Clearly, from all observations, human conscious and unconscious biases have completely penetrated the firewall of social media and other AI-based systems. We have seen research showing that data sets being fed to AI systems reflect social inequalities, including the omission of data on minority groups, much the same way the history books omitted the history of Black and brown people prior to slavery. Facial recognition software, for example, failing to distinguish gorillas from Black men, and likely to wrongly identify Black people, in some cases up to 40% of the time. And these are systems that we will be embracing to take a range of decisions, judicial decisions. Who is guilty? Who is innocent? Who is likely to engage in recidivism? Who should get a loan? What schools should people be sent to? What are our capabilities? How should the society be structured? The operating system of society itself is being adjusted. And so I say the very concept of vulnerable persons, the very concept of vulnerable communities needs elaboration. Vulnerable does not intuitively lead to a contemplation of consumers who are digitally illiterate, comfortably using technology, but digitally illiterate or digitally semi-illiterate, such as users of the technologies who are oblivious to violations of privacy and free expression, sometimes by design, unaware of algorithmic bias, unaware of algorithmic manipulation, or have a sense of resignation and impotence about these issues. The risk to such vulnerable communities can be extrapolated from a recent study by Project Information Literacy in the United States of America, which disclosed that many university students were frustrated by the opacity of algorithms which influenced their everyday interactions, but they had a sense of resignation and impotence, even nihilistic dread about algorithmic manipulation by social media sites, which they said were too useful to abandon. There is also an unawareness that the choice of search terms, the clicks that we make, serve as training data for algorithms. So in the end, individuals influence the very information they access. And I generalize this with apologies to anyone who would be offended. I generalize this to Black and brown people and to the poor who are at risk of algorithmic nudging to access, for example, consumerist information rather than information about opportunities for, let us say, high-paying jobs, educational opportunities, or opportunities for personal development. And I say to you on this call, the people who are really the expert at this, because my background is law, so I don't claim expertise in engineering and digital technology. I have a great deal of respect for the people on this call who are the innovators, and you're the people on whom we are depending to help us to chart the right digital course. I ask you, as you think about digital development, to extend into your consideration and planning perhaps the least talked about insidious aspect of the revolution, which is the threat to decent work. And the decent work I am talking about is not the usual lens of intelligent machines replacing human labor. I'm talking about the increasing role of human beings as digital scavengers, or euphemistically, content moderators. So our people need to understand that the digital revolution is not only about the glittery projections of venture capitalists, engineers, and shiny smart devices, but also the gritty side of shadowy employment of poor and vulnerable people as digital janitors who scrub digital filth from the internet without any concerns for their welfare. A lot of this going on in places like the Philippines. I hope I am not offending anyone. I am framing here for you an underrepresented or even counterintuitive perspective on digital progress, with the hope that it will find expression in our collective and diverse approaches to digital development and governance. The critique is not meant to diminish the benefits and strategic importance of artificial intelligence and related exponential technologies, but to highlight clear and present dangers to vulnerable members of the society who are increasingly reliant on AI-driven technologies to give them a voice and an opportunity to participate in the digital economy and society. And in all of this, I wish also not to be misunderstood, because I see signals being sent, such as the European Commission and their recently announced Artificial Intelligence Act, AI Act, legislation which is suggesting that government should necessarily be at the apex of the governance regime. That's not what I am articulating. Quite the opposite. It is my view that a truly sustainable framework in the digital age will require an omni-stakeholder approach to the question of AI governance and policy. It is important that all stakeholders be at the table. And I'm making a case particularly that voice be given to the most vulnerable in such a process. And because I am talking to you who are technology leaders and thinkers and innovators, I also suggest that it is critical for us to have an alignment of tech business with the public interest, particularly in ensuring that artificial intelligence does not undermine human rights. So I conclude with the observation that while it may be premature to regulate artificial intelligence on a global scale, we here in the Caribbean, as small developing states, must begin. And let me be clear to you, the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica is at the table in the IEEE, ITU, International Institute of Communications, World Economic Forum, wherever the conversation is taking place, we are locating ourselves, because this revolution that is on the way is the great equalizer, an opportunity for us not to be rule takers, but to be rule makers. So I conclude by saying that we have to begin with earnest to participating in describing, defining, and prescribing the broad ethical principles which should guide AI development, knowing that these must be adapted to our local circumstances. And I'm saying to you also as tech innovators that these considerations should begin at the design stage and occupy our attention to the deployment stage, the whole life cycle of artificial intelligence, not after the extreme AI impacts take effect on our vulnerable societies. So I hope I did not bore you. I know there could be a language barrier, so I hope I have not left you and gone on without you fully grasping what I am saying, but I am most grateful to you for your polite attention, and I make myself available now for a conversation. Your not just questions, but also your own comments and perspectives on what I have shared. And if you need for me to elaborate on anything in a digital context, such as, for example, the fact that the Jamaican government announced just 2 months ago that we are to begin digital television switchover in January of 2022 and analog switch off in January of 2023 using the American ATSC 3.0 standard. You know, if you'd like me to elaborate on that, I'd be very happy to do so. And I hope I wasn't too long. The organizers told me to talk for 30 minutes. Thank you very much. I am not seeing the moderator, but I'm looking here at the chat. What mechanisms guarantee the ethical design and that it will not be altered in the future? And that's a very important question. That is, oh, you mean in terms of the Broadcasting Commission's thinking about automated content monitoring system? Well, as far as we are concerned, all users and developers and innovators around artificial intelligence ought to look very keenly at the UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence that is currently taking place in intergovernmental discussions at the at UNESCO, and emphasizes a human-centric approach to artificial intelligence. There's also a whole series, I think it's called the P7000 series, that is coming out of the IEEE, that is to guide AI developers, and a whole range of policies that are being developed globally. And these policies, in fact, the ones that we gravitate to, emphasize a human-centric approach to AI, that there should be a human in the middle of any decision making. So the conversations we're having around the system emphasizes ethical approaches and would pay very close attention, for example, to ensuring that there's a respect for data rights as set out in law. I see another question that says, at the end of your speech, could you answer the question, what mechanisms are? That I've already answered. And then Miguel, Jamaica, knock on the door, 100% agree. Thank you, Miguel. Is AI playing against us, guys? Well, I think, Miguel, that was a question intended for Guadeloupe, but may I just make the case that Guadeloupe and Jamaica are not very far apart in terms of where we are in this AI contestation. I mean, I say all of these things, but the fact is that there is a troika. China, the United States of America, the European Commission, and by the way, there's one country I hardly hear being mentioned in all of this, which is Israel, that is very quietly advancing rapidly in artificial intelligence innovation, particularly surveillance systems. So the struggle we have is that the large countries are so focused on their own internal interest, as I said, very much commercially driven, that we are at risk of corporatism and we are at risk of nationalism, and the global multilateral system, I believe, is not designed to give us an adequate response, which is why I'm so much articulating for Guadeloupe and for Jamaica and for the small island states to not be reactive to artificial intelligence, but to take the opportunity now to influence AI governance as we develop new rules. Well, thank you. I see Shalom saying it was a good talk, and Audrey saying it was clear. I am so grateful, because I did wonder whether, I was speaking too quickly and my English was not clear. So I'm grateful to these responses. Nicholas is saying it's a noble cause, but it will be very hard to implement a regulation across all the internet. I entirely agree with you, Nicholas. So we have to then talk about, what are we solving for? You're absolutely right. And we're going to have to, I think, take a risk approach. What are the high risks that we are concerned about? For example, privacy and bias, law enforcement, the judicial system. I would imagine, Nicholas, that a lot of us would probably agree that we definitely need our governments and our regulators to pay very keen attention, let us say, to facial recognition systems that are being developed. We need to have very clear rules on, let us say, autonomous weapons. But I'm also sure that many of us on this call would say, listen, we're less concerned about artificial intelligence that is involved in helping people to select their music or their videos, that kind of thing. So I think a risk approach is going to have to be taken, because you're right. At the same time, though, Nicholas, when you talk about how difficult it is to regulate the internet, I would imagine that we would have had similar concerns about aviation, cars, when we were developing road networks and deploying cars. How are we going to manage all of these things? Even today, if you go and do the research, I don't even believe we have settled clearly on traffic light rules across the world, although by consensus, wherever we go, we know what green means, red and amber. And then if everything is dissolving into a single internet platform, if we're talking about the internet of all things, including machines that are not smart. So there's no need for our blender to be connected to the internet. Why should my blender be connected to the internet? It is going to be connected to the internet. It's a dumb machine, but it is going to be connected to the internet. Not because it's going to mean anything to me as the consumer, but because it's going to mean something to the manufacturer, to be able to know what I am blending, how often I am blending, and I don't know what he's going to be interested in, including having my blender listen to me. So I believe there is a role to be played by governments in an omni-stakeholder context to ensure that as we embrace these technologies, we do so in a way that is not technologically deterministic. Nothing will have to be, as we say, they should be. Nothing has to be as they are. And we can see that now, the kinds of conversations we're having now about what should happen to Facebook. Should we be descaling some of these companies to minimize or to cauterize, mitigate against their ability to play on the entire internet value chain and to create bottlenecks? Those are not conversations that were happening 5 years ago. So I think, Nicholas, what you are properly pointing us to is the complexity of what we're talking about and the fact that the operating systems of society are changing, and that these are not simplistic matters, but we have to take them on. And Nicholas goes on to say, I think people should be educated first to protect themselves and their data when using the internet. And you're absolutely right. That is what I meant by digital literacy, but I'm also saying a new digital media and information literacy is required. We have to go far beyond where we are now when we talk about a digital literacy.
Hi, Cordel. I have some question about you. How artificial intelligence governance protect personal human data?
So that is the great debate that, in my view, is to take place. Data is the oil for artificial intelligence. I mean, some people on this call know about this far more than I do and are far more advanced in thinking about it and say it's not as major a problem as we think in the future, because we may very well get into synthetic data, and smarter machines are going to use synthetic data to train themselves. Well, that's the future. What we do know now is that our data is being used in ways that create asymmetrical relationships. We don't know what is being collected about us, or we are oblivious to what is being collected about us. And there are few constraints on the use of such data. Some of us argue that there should be a right to personal proprietary control of data. I am very attracted to that view, but I haven't yet seen how having personal control over data works in the real sense. I mean, one of the things I would say to the innovators on this call is, I still, as a regular person, remain perplexed as to why is it that each time I go to purchase an application or go to somebody's website, they say to me, oh, we have a cookie, and you need to accept this cookie. And the whole point of the cookie is to track me, to collect my data. So I have been saying, well, why can't I have a personal Cordel cookie? Why isn't it the other way around? Why can't somebody design something so I have my cookie that tracks me, collects my personal data, and I determine which website, which application should have access to my data, and even determine which data should not be accessed. So this question of data rights is a very serious one. I'm sure most of us on this call are familiar with the EU GDPR, which is their data protection rights law. I interpret it in a slightly different way from most people. I actually, whilst it is about data protection, I actually believe that what has gone on here is that the Europeans have recognized that China and the United States of America are so far advanced with artificial intelligence in terms of the design and the algorithm, that what Europe can have as an advantage is data, which is the oil for artificial intelligence. And so to me, GDPR is not just about human rights. It is also about transatlantic trade. A recognition that if data is important, create a legal structure. Yes, to protect human rights, but in essence, what you're also doing is retaining control over your data. That is something we haven't thought about in the Caribbean. That is something I believe that we ought to be focused on. And when you go to AI for Caribbean.com, you will see that in the draft Caribbean AI policy brief, the question of data rights and data control and protection is given attention, because there is a view that we need to think about in the Caribbean, valuing our data, and putting in place a framework that allows us to retain some control over it. And that we should not get caught up in this question of, oh, we are small islands and we are insignificant. Jamaica, for example, has a global cultural footprint in reggae music, Rastafari, in sports, in education that bears no relation to Jamaica's small size and economic ranking. The same thing applies to the data that we create in the Caribbean, particularly around the creative industries. Our cultural data needs to be protected, and the data on our people. We can't have external platforms being more informed about who we are than us and our governments. Makes absolutely no sense. So that's a very long, circumlocucious answer, but I hope I have addressed the question.
Cordel, I am so glad to speak about you about EI governments and your conferences and topic is very interesting, and I'm very confident about different step and goal to very strong about protect data and many support about innovation and resources about Jamaican government to lead Caribbean country. And I'm very very upset and for your presentation today. And thank you for all of think about Guadeloupetech. You lead your legacy and govern and support membership and partnership of Guadeloupe Island. It's very close than Jamaica, and I don't know Jamaica, but I think in my plan for 2 weeks ago to visit your country is the nice place to be work and change and share with people for innovation, economical, sustainable development. I am very happy to speak with you today. And many web users send efficient question about artificial intelligence.
Well, thank you very much.
Do you have
Thank
another
you.
question, or
I
for
do.
you it's great, or do you have another point of view?
I would
For
like
you
to
it's
ask a
okay?
question if possible, please.
Daniel?
Yes, thank you, sir. First and foremost, I just want to congratulate you on such a great presentation, especially being in Canada and being exposed to the fact that we are not, as far as the Black community, we haven't welcomed such initiatives. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, for giving your time and just to share and to raise awareness on artificial intelligence. So thank you so much. And number two, my question will be, um, is there any course of action that that will facilitate the transmission between the outpouring and the enthusiastic, outreach that I can hear from your voice and see from your presentation that will flow into Guadeloupe Islands on a pragmatic manner, on a pragmatic level? Is there anything as far as collaboration? And I know that's a great, start. You speaking, but especially moving forward after the uh, after COVID. So is there anything physically that will reassure and establish such relationship? That's what I wanted to know.
Yes, well, thank you, Daniel, for that question. And you have raised a very important point. I was talking to someone just few days ago when I got the invitation from Betty to join this conversation about Guadeloupe, and then realized that Guadeloupe is actually not a permanent member of, let us say, UNESCO, because I was trying to establish relationships with the Guadeloupean representative. I don't know of any overtures now to reach out in a specific way to the non-English speaking Caribbean islands, but it is critical. It is as critical as a conversation Jamaica is going to have next week, Tuesday, on World Africa Day with the president of South Africa, the Jamaican Prime Minister and the president of South Africa, a conversation in which I will have a small moderating role that is really looking deeply at the linkages, trade and cultural linkages between Jamaica and Africa. And I do believe we definitely need to deepen relations, those the Caribbean islands that are English speaking and those that are not. And the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Initiative, in fact, is expected to be pan-Caribbean. So I would want to say, first of all, that speaking now as the executive director of the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, we are very open to establishing relations with any like body in Guadeloupe. We would also recommend that any similar Guadeloupean agency become a part of the small nations regulatory forum of the International Institute of Communications. And also that persons on this call take an interest in the AI for Caribbean initiative, go on to the website, send us an email at AI for the Caribbean at broadcom.org, AI for Caribbean at broad, B-R-O-A-D, broadcom.org, and let us build the relations. But my last point on this, Daniel, is that the fact that I have been invited to this conversation and that I see there are 2 or 3 other Jamaican speakers who will be participating is a tremendous advance. I knew absolutely nothing about this Guadeloupean initiative until Betty reached out to me. So I now see this as a permanent relationship that we're going to have, and I hope that it will lead to very deeper bilateral relations at the level of industry and at the level of policymaking.